Good morning, everyone. Hundreds of thousands of children in America experience abuse. According to the National Children's Alliance, more than 420,000 abused were involved in cases of child abuse. 76% of this done by parents. These people have higher risks for health issues, substance abuse, and other mental health issues. Without any help, they have a higher chance of going on and abusing. What is abuse? Abuse is to mistreat or use wrongly of someone or something. Victims are a sacrifice of their childhood, their body, and their mind. And children are powerless against this. They don't understand the difference between what is right and what is wrong. During the Industrial Revolution, children as young as 4 to 5 years old worked in dangerous mines and factories. In the factories, children were squeezed between heavy machinery that often maimed or killed them. In the mines, there was dangerous gases that would cause explosions or suffocation. And this is the start of the child labor laws. And since then, the abuse has only gotten more subtle. Today, we see parents filming their children for content for money, putting them in compromising positions, such as potty training and getting them ready for the day. They're using their discipline as content. Ruby Franke is known for this. She would say that her children would lose the privilege to eat. When parents publicize private moments, they lose the respect from their children. When they lose the respect from their children, this might entail sneaking around and being secretive over things that normally wouldn't be an issue. When the parents lose the trust of their children, they can cause toxic comparisons and emotional distance between the two. And children may mirror this behavior. What is the difference between abuse and discipline? They are often confused, but they are very different. Abuse is to mistreat or use wrongly of someone, while discipline is the practice of training people to obey rules or a code of behavior. The difference is in the purpose. Abuse is harmful, while discipline helps a child to grow. The Bible also agrees that discipline is an act of love. Proverbs 23 and 29 explain that the correction of a child leads to their well-being and brings peace. By disciplining your child, you're bringing them closer to you and closer to God. What is the big issue here? Our parents are the greatest influence on a child. The children's normal reflects on what is in their home. How parents act is how the children will act. Trauma is unforgettable and has long-lasting effects that may affect their personality, their identity, and their development for years to come. Their brains are still developing, so when they live in a constant fear or stress, their bodies remain in a constant state of survival. As a result, the child's bodies carry the trauma long before they are able to comprehend what is happening to them. Who is abusing children? Some abuse is committed by strangers, but the Indiana Center for Prevention of Youth and Suicide reports that more than 90% of abusers are people children know, love, and trust. The majority of abuse cases comes from the one closest to the child, often family members, and in many cases, the parents. They are typically the closest to the child and holds the greatest power over them. The truth about it is that humans are unable to treat people with the proper respect unless they know and love Christ. People are hateful and angry and cannot be otherwise without a God. This can poison your thoughts and can drain your energy, and this behavior can damage relationships and leave you to feel more isolated than ever. There are several different types of abuse. There is physical harm, emotional abuse, neglect, or sexual. If you witness this, you should call 911. But make sure the child is not in immediate danger. If they are not, then report it to your local child protective services. Stay calm, make sure the child is safe, and avoid confronting the abuser. This will help to not escalate the situation any further. Listen to the child, make sure the child knows that you believe them, and document everything that you've seen and been told. This will protect the child in the future and can prevent the cycle of abuse. The root issue of it is that it stems from sin nature. We put ourselves above others, and this cannot be solved without addressing the root issue of sin. Victims can be susceptible to this selfishness as well. And this is not blaming victims for the abuse that they suffered, but they are still responsible for their own actions. They might focus on one's pain, which could hurt others. And oftentimes, people don't speak up about what has happened to them. They might be afraid of how they are perceived. They'll be pitied, judged, or even seen as weak. Talking about it won't change the situation or what had happened to them. It's not for fun stories, for attention, and it may only reopen wounds which can cause vulnerability. And to them, it feels safer to keep it to themselves rather than opening up. Some say there are more than one ways to begin the abuse cycle, and others can go on to abuse because trauma is and can be experienced at any point in your life. While this is true, the most common is in the childhood because children's brains aren't fully developed, so the impact is more permanent. This is a very big issue. It is a direct insult to the image of God, the very thing that makes us human. Genesis 1:27 says, "So God created man as his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them." All people were made in this way, and the exploitation of people is using the image of God for selfish gain. And this explains why people find it so difficult when dealing with the subject of abuse, because everybody knows it's wrong. How might one go about abusing their child? Childhood abuse is a catalyst for the cycle of abuse. In many cases, it starts from unresolved anger, past trauma, or painful experiences that were not properly addressed. When people experience any type of abuse in early life, they can develop unhealthy coping mechanisms or unhealthy outlets for their emotions. These emotions can build over time and can overwhelm your mind. Children often become the unintended targets of this abuse, of this emotional explosion. Adding on to unresolved trauma, mental diseases, neurocognitive disorders, which means that they affect how the brain functions with thinking and reasoning. Dementia can, according to the Alzheimer's Association, affect behavior, feelings, and relationships. Those dealing with these conditions may not fully understand their actions. They may act out in confusion or frustration or fear that leads to the child abuse. This highlights how a lack of awareness and impaired cognition can play a role. There's also situations dealing with disabled children. The National Children's Alliance says developmentally and intellectually disabled children are particularly vulnerable to abuse of all kinds, experiencing abuse at a rate about 3.5 times higher than the average child. These children with physical disabilities, such as being confined to a wheelchair or needing help with the basic activities of daily life, can be particularly vulnerable. These children depend on others for their basic needs, such as brushing their teeth and getting dressed for the day. If the one responsible is neglectful, impatient, or verbally dismissive, then they are abusing the child. This neglect and emotional mistreatment is just as damaging as physical harm, especially for children who have limited ability to advocate for themselves due to their disabilities. What might the abuse look like? Abusers can and might minimize the effects of their own actions, which can invalidate the victim. Victims feel like they're worthless and can stunt their compassion that they have. When one feels like they don't matter, they may believe that others don't matter as well. These people have higher adverse childhood experiences, or ACE scores. According to the Cleveland Clinic, an ACE score is a total number of adverse childhood experiences you face growing up. The ACE test asks you 10 questions about traumatic events that may have happened in your childhood. Someone with a high ACE score interacting with a low ACE score might have a mindset that appears to be, your pain doesn't matter, even if not stated aloud. Abuse is perpetuating and commonly seen in Hollywood and social media. We can see this in actor Drake Bell in his story. His parents trusted the Hollywood industry to protect and mentor him, but that was violated. Abuse there The abuse that happened there was enabled by a lack of oversight and by assuming that success was the most important. He went on to deal with drinking and substance abuse and was charged in 2021 with attempted endangering children and disseminating matter harmful to juveniles. This shows that abuse can be perpetuated by an environment that disregards warning signs, it silences victims, and prioritizes a career over child protection. Being educated helps this process. The more educated you are, the more tools you will have to mitigate it. By recognizing abuse, you can analyze your own life and identify potential issues. This will avoid the perpetuation of burdening children with its adult problems. We need to break this chain. Taking time to self-evaluate can allow a person to start the healing process. This process encourages growth, just like sanctification transforms Christians into saints, bringing them closer to God. Consistent prayer becomes easier over time and creates a compassion where you may have once lost it. Compassion leads to true forgiveness without resentment of oneself and the abuser. Communities also help with dealing with trauma. Staying in community will help individuals involved to know and to remember that they are not alone. According to Ritual Wellness, ATX, it offers safety when fear feels overwhelming, hope when despair takes hold, and resiliency when a survivor feels too exhausted to keep going alone. In other words, the community builds strength and support that people need to keep going. It reminds you that your pain is seen and that they don't have to face it alone. How do we break this cycle? How do we fix this? Going to therapy to get that one-on-one help provides a safe place for children and for adults to express their feelings. It can prevent future problems. Finding something that helps with your self-expression is also necessary for processing pain. You can look at the arts, such as writing, music, and dance. And animals are surprisingly a good source of comfort. When you interact with them, you can reduce your stress, lower your blood pressure, and increase the release of oxytocin and serotonin. Remember to have compassion and empathy. And remember that every situation is different and everyone is unique. And healing is active and it takes time and patience. And it shows the strength to take initiative to do so. In summary, childhood abuse begins the abuse cycle rooted in trauma, mental illness, and environments where harmful patterns are normalized and regular. The long-term effects shape how individuals see themselves and others around them. And in many cases, a pattern is created that harms generations, where people unintentionally repeat the behaviors they witness as children. This gives something deeper about our human condition. People are formed by what they experienced, but they are not confined to it. This abuse damages trust, relationships, and the stability of the family. The breaking of the cycle is not just on the abused or professionals, but of everyone who comes into contact with it. It requires awareness, interference, education, and most importantly, compassion. Choosing to confront will ultimately protect children and restore families, breaking cycles of harm and creating a future where healing and safety are no longer the exception, but the expectation. Thank you.
First, we gotta figure out how to do that. Oh, wonderful. And start us off.
Hello, Destiny.
Hi.
So first, I wanted to say that when I was reading your paper, it's a very heavy topic.
Yes.
And so I appreciated your courage of delving into it. It's an important topic. And I really appreciated how you put you very knowledgeable stuff, dealing with your sources, and then also the intersection of faith. Of course, that's very important, how we view these things through the lens of faith. So I wanted to say that it was very well done.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. So my first question is. And I guess this would be a question about the argument itself. Would you please summarize your thesis for us in one clear sentence?
Yeah, so I would say that childhood abuse is a catalyst for the abuse cycle.
Excellent job. This was a lot of work, and I can tell your paper was very well put together, and your presentation as well.
Thank you.
And I can tell you have a real heart for this. That's really needed. Sometimes heavy topics in our culture aren't touched on because they're delicate or just ugly, and the fact that you're looking at it, I think, is really important. So I appreciate that. What do you hope that the audience would understand differently following your presentation or from reading this paper?
Yeah, I just hope that everyone can, like, if they come into contact with abuse at all, that they will recognize it for what it is and they will stop it. Like, it is a topic that I feel like isn't really talked about in the church, and I feel like we can see families and we just assume the best, but oftentimes the worst is happening. And so I hope that people can see this and that they will argue against it, and that they will just recognize it for what it is. It is a disruption and I don't know how to say this, but it is going against the image of God. Yeah.
It's in the front.
Yes.
I can tell, Destiny, that this has been on your heart long before you started writing this paper. Excellent job. You did a stellar job threading the needle through a really very difficult and heavy topic. And I wonder, as you went through your research, did it become a heavier topic as you went through the research, or did you come across some hope? Do you feel more or less hopeful now that your paper is done?
Yeah, so I ended up having like 4 pages of sources. And obviously when I researched, there was so much more that I could have like looked more into. But because of all of those sources, I began to feel more hopeful in the fact that like there's so many ways like this is seen. And my paper is just one more of them. And so I'm hopeful to the fact that it'll be more seen and more recognized and that people will see that. But also sad because of the fact that because there's so many, that means it's happening to so many people and so many people are experiencing this.
I actually have a follow-up question on sources. Was there any particular source that stood out or that you went to especially in the preparation for this paper?
Yeah, I often went to, let me find it. I think it was Psychology Today. I saw a lot from there. And then the National Children's Alliance. I ended up having a lot of statistics in my paper. And I think the statistics on the child abuse, there's so many of them. And Abel just made it so clear on the fact that like it's everywhere. And just looking deeper into that, saw how many cases there are just in the United States, and it also mentioned places in Europe as well. Yeah.
So you argue that unresolved trauma contributes to the abuse cycle, while also saying individuals remain morally responsible for their actions.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile these two ideas?
The 2 ideas of that, unresolved trauma, and then people are still responsible for their actions?
Yes. So,
Okay.
So unresolved trauma can contribute to that whole cycle.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to blame the victim.
Right.
But at the same time, they can end up abusing.
Right.
They should be morally responsible for their actions.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, so, what happened in your childhood was not your fault. You had you didn't do that to yourself. You did not choose where you were born into or what family or where you grew up. And that does shape how you see others around you and everything else. But the way that you act is still, we all have choices on how we act. And people who go out and abuse, they make that choice to do that. Even though it is their normal and that it feels safe to them, it's still wrong. But they still have that choice to do it or to not do it.
in your paper, Destiny, you talk about needing education for. Were you specifically thinking of education for abusers in order to break the abuse cycle?
Yeah, I mainly talked about how we all need it, and the fact of like the abusers needed to recognize what they did was wrong, because sometimes the way that you, the things that you say, even if they're lies, they can become your own truth. And so they need that education to recognize what they're doing is wrong, but then also the people who were abused can see that, it's wrong and I don't want to continue that. And then also for people who have not experienced that at all, but so if they see it, they can recognize it and know that it's wrong.
Okay, follow-up question. Do you have some specific examples, but maybe you came across something in your research of what that could look like? How do we go about education? When, where? How do we implement that in a cultural or societal way? Yeah,
I think for Christians in a way, it's doing a lot of research on the Bible and just taking that time to read and to know what is a healthy way to treat someone. And that's kind of how I personally I interact with other people. But obviously for the people who aren't Christians and don't read the Bible, how are they going to do that? Well, I feel like everyone has kind of a moral code in their heart, right? Because everyone has that on their heart, as it says. And I feel like we all kind of know what is wrong and what is right, at least to an extent. And so I think just taking the time, if you do something and you're like, man, that was not right, then just taking the time to evaluate your own self, whether that's journaling or talking to somebody else about what you did or something that you came into contact with, and just making sure that you're not dwelling that on that by yourself, and to share that with others or to write it down so that you're continuously realizing so that you're not continuing it. Does that make sense? Okay.
Kind of coming off of that, so as a clergy person myself, I have to go through yearly background checks and abuse training, abuse prevention training. Yes, that's important. And sadly, we've all seen and heard about the reality of clergy abuse scandals in the church. So when you write that people ultimately need Christ in order to treat others rightly, and that is true, how would you explain the fact that abuse can still happen even in Christian homes and churches?
Yeah, I think everyone has the ability to choose what is what they do, right? Everyone has that choice. And while it does happen a lot within the regular, the other world that doesn't have Christ, it does happen in the church, which is unacceptable. We know what is right and what is wrong. And I do feel personally as if because we have Christ, we're held to a higher standard. And so because we know that, we're able to kind of recognize that better. But, some people still go and do that. And I think I'm not exactly sure why that may happen. I think it's just because we all have, we are all sinful and we're all broken people, but we're all in need of Christ, ultimately. And so my hope is that those people will recognize what they're doing is wrong, that they will repent and restore the relationships that they've may have broken.
Kind of in that theme, I do have a question. I just want to see if I can clarify something you said.
Yeah.
You mentioned that people cannot show proper respect unless they know and follow Christ.
Mm-hmm.
In that, do you mean that they can't show any genuine respect, or they can't show it as fully and rightly as Christ shows us?
Yeah, I do think that they're able to have some, right? Everyone has that some respect. But I feel like we will not have the proper and righteous one unless we have God. Because he's the one that the church and the families use, because we have the Bible. So we use the Bible to dictate how we behave and treat other people.
You have your microphone, so I want to make sure. So
kind of following up with that, if a lack of relationship with Christ can limit respect, does that imply that unbelievers are going to be more inclined towards abusive relationships, or does that mean only a few? Like, where would you see that relationship between unbelief and abuse?
Yeah, I do wish that I had done like more research on that part, just because like that's such an interesting thing. But I would say that I think that we do see it more in just the regular world without Christ, just because they don't have that standard, I guess, to know how to treat people with the proper respect, because we see that from Christ and Jesus and how he walked the earth and how he treated people on his day-to-day life in the flesh.
Absolutely. Should stop turning this off. It makes it a little harder. Just as a follow-up clarification, are you saying that if someone is an unbeliever, they're definitely going to follow in that direction, or just some?
No, I don't think, not everyone does this, right? But I do think that people are more vulnerable to do it, and they're more likely to do it, but I'm not saying that all of them are like, this is going to happen to you if you're not a believer. No, that's not the case at all. But we all have redemption in Christ, so if it were to happen, then we all have Christ, and he will forgive you for that.
That's a fair clarification and good guardrail.
How should we think about abusers in this equation, given that the cycle of abuse often starts with the abuser having been abused themselves? And knowing that you also believe they're responsible for their choices. I think you did a good job clarifying that, but how do we, as believers, think about the abusers in the equation?
Right.
And I'm thinking specifically of something you wrote on page 8. Compassion and empathy are essential for everyone because each person's experiences are unique, not only for those around us, but for both the abused and the abuser.
Yes. So I do think that while we should see the abuser for what they did was wrong, but we should also see the fact that they are a broken human in need of a savior. So it's kind of a situation where it's love the sinner, hate the sin. We should hate what they do, but we should love them because they're still a human being. So we should still have compassion on them because what they did was wrong, but we should also recognize what they did was wrong and why it was wrong.
Okay. A little bit less of a question. If you were to continue studying this topic beyond this project, what area would you most want to explore after this?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me see. I think probably, and I did a lot of research on like the entirety of it, but if I were to like look through my paper and see if there's a part that I wish I could go like more in depth on, I wish that I could go through and go more in depth than I already did on the truth about it. Why does this happen? Instead of just thinking like, oh, this is so bad, like this is awful, think more about the root cause of everything rather than like, why do people do this? Okay, well, what is causing them to feel that way? And just going more in depth into just logical like progression of like, why do we think this is okay? Why might this just keep happening? And how more can we prevent it?
So like trying to get at the root and
Yeah.
More preventative cares, maybe see what signs, warning signs, red flags,
Right.
to be able to intervene and help that person before
Yes.
it cycles.
Yes.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
This one's more kind of structure. I noticed that you have a lot in your paper about exploitation and quite a bit about abuse. What would you define the nature between the two? Is exploitation a form of abuse, a subset within abuse, or a separate but related issue?
Yeah, they're very similar, right? But I think it's one of those instances where they're very similar but different. right? So exploitation is the unjust use for advantage. So you're using that and you see it and you're doing it on purpose. So you're going through it and you make a decision and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna hurt you because you did this to me. While abuse is to mistreat or use something wrongly. So you're using it, you have its value, and then you're beating it up, right? So I think it's just the difference in that is that one, you're doing it kind of like blatantly on purpose, and the other one is you're still doing it, like you're making the choice to do it, but it's not for your own advantage, I don't think, yeah.
Actually, I had a follow-up question there on your definition of abuse. It's kind of a broad definition, which can be good in some cases because there are times socially where we might try to sweep things under the rug when it's actually pretty serious. But it is broad enough that we could slip in things that normally we wouldn't call abuse. How would you distinguish abuse from ordinary conflict or harshness or brusqueness or something like that?
Right. I do think there's a point where, if you were to like yell at someone, for instance, right? There is a point where that is like, we're human, we make mistakes. But it's to the point where it's just often and regular and it gets worse and worse and worse without intervention.
So it'd be kind of the repeated pattern,
Right.
the frequency of it or the intensity of it? Is
Yeah.
that kind of where you draw that line?
Yes.
Okay.
Because it's the fact where one time it's a mistake, right? You're not going to make that mistake again. You repent and you fix that relationship. But it's a point where it doesn't just happen one time or it's here and there. It begins to, it's a pattern and it happens again and again. And it may stem to other things, and it may entail like a physical harming of someone. Yeah.
I have one more.
Okay.
Okay, so was there any idea you originally believed about abuse that changed after doing your research?
I guess it could be all of the different types of abuse mainly, because I also in my paper talked about multilingual and immigration households. I did not know that. There were certain things that once I started researching, I was flabbergasted at the fact that this is happening to people and in ways that I didn't even know. And I kind of heard about situations where the child is disabled and kind of stuff like that. But a lot of those ways that you don't really see it often were the ways that I was flabbergasted at because I had never heard about it. Yeah. Yes.
All right, thank you so much, Jessica.